I never dreamed of becoming homeless. No one does. But you know what's strange? It's not as awful as you think. People have this image of the homeless, dirty, broken, stinking of alcohol, begging on street corners like ghosts of society. They assume we've lost everything, that our lives are over, that we spend every waking moment drowning in regret. But here's something you won't believe. Sometimes, this life feels more like freedom than failure. Yeah, it's cold. Yeah, it's dangerous. And yeah, there are nights when hunger gnaws at me like an animal. But there are also things I see now that I never noticed before. Tiny moments that used to slip by when I was too busy running the race. Things I didn't appreciate when I had walls around me, a title to my name, and a steady paycheck. I know what you're thinking. How does someone end up like this? You tell yourself it could never happen to you, that you're different, that no matter how bad things get, you'll never fall this far. I used to believe that too, but it takes less than you think. One wrong turn, one mistake, one piece of bad luck, and suddenly you're outside looking in, watching the world move on without you. Sitting on a bench while people walk past, pretending not to see you. You become invisible, or worse, an inconvenience. And then, something shifts. At first, you fight it, clinging to whatever scraps of normalcy you have left. But over time, you learn to survive. Then, you learn to let go. It's been 3 years since I last had a bed that was mine. Since I last turned a key in a door that led to a place where I belonged. Since I last heard someone say my name like it meant something. You think you know what it means to be homeless. You don't. But if you really want to understand, if you want the truth they never tell you, then listen carefully. Because after this, you'll never look at people like me the same way again. I didn't wake up one day and decide to be homeless. Nobody does. It doesn't happen in an instant. It happens in layers, in slow, barely noticeable steps, until one day, you look around, and you're standing at the edge of a cliff you never saw coming. I wasn't born into this. I had a job, a place to be every morning, people who counted on me. If you saw me back then, you wouldn't have looked twice. I was just another guy in line for coffee, another face in rush hour traffic, another person playing by the rules, because that's what I was raised to believe in. Work hard, stay responsible, and life will reward you. That's the deal, right? I used to believe in that system. I trusted it. The structure, the process, the way everything was supposed to fit together, school, job, home, stability. I thought it was solid. A safety net. Something you could rely on. I was wrong. The cracks were there the whole time. I just didn't see them. Or maybe I refused to. Because that's what we do, isn't it? We ignore the signs, tell ourselves we're fine, that it'll get better, that there's always another way out. Until there isn't. For me, it started with a layoff. Nothing dramatic, no scandal, just a company restructuring. I wasn't special, I was just one of the names on a list, another casualty of budget cuts. But I told myself it was temporary, that I'd bounce back. That's what everyone says when they lose a job, right? I had savings. Not a lot, but enough. Rent kept coming, bills kept stacking, and every rejection email felt like a slow, invisible rope tightening around my throat. Still, I held on to the illusion. The system wouldn't let me fail, not completely. Then came the eviction notice. That's when the panic set in. The realization that this wasn't just a rough patch, it was a free fall. I had friends, but how do you ask for help when you don't even know how bad things will get? When does a bad month turn into something worse? You tell yourself you just need a little more time, that it's not that serious, that you're just in between things. But in between doesn't last forever. And then comes the moment, the one you don't see coming. The moment when you stop being someone struggling and start being someone who doesn't have a home. It's not like in the movies, no dramatic breakdown, no rain-soaked street corner, no slow piano music playing in the background. It happens quietly. One night, you don't have a place to go. So you sit on a bench, or find an all-night diner, or walk until your legs ache because if you stop moving, the reality of it will crush you. And that's when you realize, everything you thought you knew about security, about stability, about how the world works, was just an illusion. Because once you're out, you start to see how fragile it all is. How close everyone is to the edge, whether they know it or not. I used to believe the system protected people. That if you worked hard, played by the rules, you'd never end up here. I don't believe that anymore. You think you exist. That you have a place in this world. That you matter. Then you lose your address. And suddenly, you're no one. I didn't realize how much of my identity depended on something as simple as a street and a number. Without an address, you don't just lose a home. You lose proof that you belong anywhere. Try applying for a job without one. Try opening a bank account. Try keeping your phone service when they ask for a billing address, and you don't have one to give. I was still me, but the world didn't see me that way anymore. At first, I fought it. I tried to keep everything as normal as possible. I told myself I wasn't really homeless. I was just in transition. I stayed in motels until the money ran out. Then I crashed on couches, doing my best to stretch favors without making it obvious how bad things had gotten. I kept wearing the same button-up shirts, even as they got wrinkled, even when I started running out of places to wash them. But eventually, you run out of places. You run out of options. And that's when you start to fade. At some point, people stop making eye contact with you. It's not personal, it's survival. No one wants to acknowledge that you exist, because if they do, then they have to accept that someone like you can exist. I used to think people ignored the homeless because they were disgusted, afraid. That's not it. It's because they don't want to see how thin the line really is. Most people are one accident, one job loss, one eviction away from being right here with me. And they can't face that. So they pretend we're not here. There's no guidebook for this life. No handbook, no instruction manual, no step-by-step tutorial for how to survive when you lose everything. You figure it out the hard way. And if you don't last. The first thing you learn is that the streets have rules. They aren't written anywhere, but break them, and you'll find out real quick why they exist. Rule number 1, never sleep in the same place twice. I learned this on my first real night out. At that point, I still had hope. I still thought this was temporary, that I just needed a little time to figure things out. So I found a quiet spot near a 24-hour gas station, curled up next to a wall, and tried to sleep. At some point in the night, I woke up to a boot pressing into my ribs. Move. That's all the guy said. He didn't yell, didn't threaten me. He didn't have to. One look at his face, and I knew. He'd been out here a lot longer than me. He didn't care where I went, just that I left his spot. That's when I understood. You don't just find a place to sleep. You find a place that isn't already claimed. And even then, you never stay too long. Rule number 2. If you look too homeless, you become a target. There's a balance you have to maintain. If you look too clean, people assume you're scamming. If you look too dirty, you stop being a person. They see you as a problem, something to be cleared off the street. You have to stay somewhere in between. Just neat enough to walk into a store without getting kicked out. Just rough enough to blend in. Rule number 3, you are always being watched. Cops, security guards, business owners. Someone is always watching, waiting for a reason to make you leave. The trick is to move before they ask. Stay ahead of the problem. Rule number 4, public bathrooms are survival tools. You learn which fast food places don't lock their restrooms, which gas stations don't ask questions, which public libraries let you sit for hours without bothering you. Hygiene isn't about vanity, it's about survival. If you smell bad, people avoid you. If people avoid you, you can't blend in. And if you can't blend in, you're an easy target. These are the things no one tells you. You either learn them fast, or you don't last long. I never knew what hunger really felt like. Sure, I had skipped meals before, busy days, bad weeks, trying to stretch a paycheck. But that kind of hunger is nothing. That's just inconvenience. Real hunger is different. It starts slow, a dull ache in your stomach. At first, you tell yourself you can push through it. Drink some water. Ignore it. But it doesn't go away. It sharpens. It becomes something else, something deeper, something that feels like it's clawing at your insides. By the third day without food, you stop thinking about anything else. I remember sitting outside a grocery store, watching people come out with bags of food, smelling fresh bread from the bakery section every time the door slid open. My mouth was dry. My hands were shaking. I told myself I'd never beg, that I had standards, that no matter how bad things got, I wouldn't ask strangers for help. Then an old man walked past me, carrying a sandwich. He sat down on a bench, unwrapped it, took a bite. He wasn't in a rush, just enjoying the day. And I just stared, not at him, at the sandwich. That was the moment I understood something ugly about myself. Hunger doesn't just make you desperate, it makes you less human. It strips away the parts of you that used to care about dignity, about pride. It makes you something raw, something animal. I didn't ask him for food. I wanted to. I almost did. But instead, I walked away before I could hate myself any more than I already did. Later that night, I found a dumpster behind a restaurant. The bags were still warm, full of food tossed out at the end of the night. Burgers, fries, half-eaten sandwiches still in their wrappers. I told myself I wouldn't do it. Then I did. And the worst part? It wasn't bad. That's when I realized how much food is wasted, perfectly good food, thrown away because it's easier than giving it to people like me. Grocery stores like their dumpsters. Restaurants pour bleach over their leftovers. Not because they have to, but because they don't want us to have it. Because if we eat, we exist. And if we exist, they have to acknowledge us. And nobody wants to do that. There's a strange thing about kindness when you're homeless. You'd think it would be the thing that saves you, that gives you hope, that reminds you the world isn't all bad. But most of the time, it just makes you feel worse. I know that sounds ungrateful. I know it's easy to say, well, at least people care. But that's the thing, most of them don't. Not really. People want to help in ways that make them feel good, not in ways that actually make a difference. They want the quick, easy version of kindness, the kind that doesn't require too much effort or too much thought. You know how I can tell? Because they never actually look at me. They'll hand me a few bucks, say, "God bless you," and then walk away before I can even say thank you. They'll drop change at my feet, careful not to get too close, and keep moving like I'm nothing more than a stop on their route. They do it to feel better about themselves, to believe that they did their good deed for the day. And I should be grateful, right? I should take whatever I can get. But you know what hurts the most? It's when they act like I'm not a real person, like I don't have a name, like I don't have a past, like I'm just a walking, breathing reminder of something they'd rather not think about. The worst are the ones who ask questions, not because they actually care, but because they want a story. They want me to tell them some tragic, dramatic tale that explains why I'm here. They want a neat little narrative that lets them shake their heads and say, "That's awful," before they go back to their warm homes and clean sheets and never think about me again. What happened to you? I hear that a lot. Like I owe them an explanation. Like I'm some kind of cautionary tale for them to carry around in their heads when they need a reminder to be grateful for what they have. You know what no one ever asks? What do you need? Because that would mean actually helping. That would mean seeing me, really seeing me, and realizing that a couple of dollars or a leftover sandwich won't fix this. That would mean facing the truth that this problem isn't about bad luck or bad choices or people who did this to themselves. It's about a system that lets this happen. And then there are the heroes, the ones who take videos of themselves handing out food to homeless people, grinning for the camera, making sure to get the perfect angle before they post it online with some caption like, "Helping those in need, red heart." They don't care about me. They care about looking like they care. I had a guy do that to me once. Came up to me with a bag of food, camera rolling, asking me to tell him my story. I was starving. I hadn't eaten in almost 2 days, but the second I saw that phone in his hand, something in me just shut down. I didn't want his food. I didn't want to be some prop in his little performance of generosity. I just sat there, staring at him, until he got uncomfortable and walked away. Did he post the video anyway? Probably. Probably wrote some long caption about how sad it is to see people struggling, how we should all do better. Then he went home and forgot about me. I'm not saying all kindness is fake. Every now and then, you meet someone who actually sees you. Someone who talks to you instead of talking at you. Someone who asks, "Are you okay?" instead of, "How did you end up like this?" I met a woman once outside a coffee shop. I was sitting near the curb, trying to stay out of the way, when she walked past, then stopped and turned back. She didn't hand me money. She didn't ask me for a story. She just sat down next to me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like a human being again. We talked for maybe 20 minutes. Nothing deep, nothing dramatic. She told me about her day, asked if I wanted a coffee. I said yes. She didn't act like she was saving me. She didn't act like she pitied me. She just treated me like a person. And that meant more than any dollar ever could. Because that's the thing people don't understand. Homelessness isn't just about losing your home. It's about losing your place in the world. It's about becoming invisible. Most people don't see us. They see a problem, a statistic, a nuisance. But every once in a while, someone looks at you and actually sees you. And that's the kind of kindness that matters. That's the kind of kindness that stays with you. And the sad part is, it's the rarest kind of all. At first, I told myself this was temporary. That was year one. I still had hope back then. I still thought I could climb out of this. I kept my resume saved in my email. I checked job listings when I could get access to a computer at the library. I rehearsed answers in my head for interviews I never got. I held on to the belief that I was just one lucky break away from getting my life back. But then came year two. That's when the hope started to rot. Because no one wants to hire someone without an address. No one calls back a number that's disconnected. No one trusts a man who walks in with clothes that don't quite fit, who looks just a little too tired, a little too worn down. I still tried for a while. I bounced between shelters, scraped together what I could, found day labor gigs that barely paid enough to eat. And then, one day, I stopped. I don't know exactly when it happened. Maybe it was the day my ID got stolen. Maybe it was the time I stood in line at a soup kitchen and realized I recognized half the people there, people who had once told me they weren't like the others, that they were going to make it out. Or maybe it was the night I found myself walking through the city, passing by bars and restaurants filled with laughter, with light, with life, and realizing that I didn't belong in that world anymore. That's when year three started. And that's when I stopped thinking about getting back. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't remember what it felt like. You don't realize how fast your old life disappears. At first, you hold on to little things. Your phone, your ID, maybe a backpack with a few reminders of who you used to be. You tell yourself you're still the same person, that this is just a detour, not a permanent stop. But then, piece by piece, those things start to fade. Your phone dies. You can't charge it. You sell it for food. Your ID gets lost. Without it, you can't get a job, can't get a place to stay, can't prove who you are. Your clothes wear down. You trade them out at donation centers. Soon, nothing you wear belongs to you anymore. It's just whatever you can find, whatever fits well enough to get by. Your name becomes something you hear less and less. People stop using it. The world starts calling you something else: man, buddy, pal, sir, homeless guy. And then, one day, you realize you don't even remember your last address. And that's when it happens. That's when you stop being someone who is down on their luck and start being someone who lives out here. And the scariest part? You stop fighting it. People think that being homeless is a constant struggle, that every day is a battle to get out. But the truth is, at some point, you adapt. Because the human mind can only take so much disappointment before it shuts down. At first, you wake up every morning thinking, maybe today will be different. Maybe today you'll get a job. Maybe today someone will help. Maybe today something will change. And then, after enough mornings, you stop waking up with that thought. Because hope is heavy. And when you carry it for too long without relief, it crushes you. I remember the first time I realized I wasn't desperate to go back anymore. It was a summer night. The air was warm. The city was quiet. I was sitting on a patch of grass in a park, looking up at the sky. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't cold. I wasn't worried about anything. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. No rent, no bills, no stress about deadlines or emails or social expectations. No boss breathing down my neck. No fear of losing what I had, because I had nothing left to lose. It's hard to explain to someone who's never been here. But when you've spent years fighting for a way back, and the world keeps slamming the door in your face, there comes a moment when you ask yourself, what if I just stop trying? What if this is it? What if this is my life now? And the strangest part? The moment you stop resisting, it gets easier. People like to believe that homelessness is always temporary. They tell themselves that the only difference between them and me is that I haven't tried hard enough. That if I just got my act together, I could re-enter the world and pick up where I left off. But that's not how it works. You can't just step back into society when you've been erased from it. Try renting an apartment without a credit history. Try getting a job when you've got 3 years of nothing on your resume. Try saving money when every dollar goes to surviving another day. The world isn't built to bring us back in. It's built to keep us out. And once you're out here long enough, even if you wanted to go back, the truth is, you wouldn't know how. There's always a moment. You don't always see it right away. You tell yourself you're still fighting, that you just need one lucky break, that any day now, you'll pull yourself out of this. But at some point, that last thread snaps. And when it does, you understand something that most people never have to face. There is no going back. For me, it happened on a winter night, the kind of cold that gets inside your bones and stays there. The shelters were full, and the streets weren't safe, so I did what I always did. I walked. Kept moving to stay warm, to stay invisible, to stay alive. At some point, I found a parking garage, half empty, with enough shadows to disappear into. I picked a corner near the stairwell, sat down against the concrete, and wrapped my arms around myself for warmth. I told myself it was just for a little while, just until morning. Then a security guard showed up. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't aggressive. He just looked at me the way they all do, like I was something that needed to be removed, like I was a stain on the city that needed to be scrubbed away. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask if I had anywhere else to go. He just told me to leave. And that's when I knew. I wasn't a person anymore. I was a problem. That was the moment it became clear. The world doesn't want us to exist. It doesn't matter how I got here. It doesn't matter if I used to have a job, a home, a future. The second you lose those things, you stop being part of the system, and the system is designed to forget you. No one is coming to help. No one is going to fix this. People like to pretend that homelessness is a choice, that if we really wanted to, we could just get a job and pull ourselves out. But how do you get a job when you haven't had a proper shower in weeks? When your ID is gone, your phone is dead, and your clothes make people cross the street to avoid you? The system isn't broken. It works exactly the way it was designed to. And people like me? We were never meant to make it back. I used to think that being homeless was about losing everything, your home, your job, your sense of security. But it's not. It's about becoming invisible. That's the hardest part. Not the cold, not the hunger, not even the fear. It's realizing that you don't exist to the world anymore. People don't look at you. They don't speak to you. They walk past like you're a ghost, like acknowledging you would somehow make you real. The only time they notice is when they want you gone, when you're sleeping somewhere too close to where they live, when you make them uncomfortable just by existing. And the worst part? I understand why they do it. Because I used to be one of them. I used to think homelessness was a choice. That it only happened to people who gave up, addicts, criminals, people who did it to themselves. That if you really wanted to, you could climb out of it. But that's the lie people tell themselves so they can sleep at night. Because the truth is too terrifying to face. The truth is, this could happen to anyone. One accident, one missed paycheck, one medical emergency. That's all it takes. And when it happens, you realize how thin the line really is, how quickly everything can be taken from you, how fast you can fall through the cracks. And once you're on the other side, the world is designed to keep you there. Shelters are overcrowded and dangerous. Assistance programs are a maze of bureaucracy designed to make people give up. Employers don't hire people without addresses. You need an ID to get a job, but you need an address to get an ID. Everything is stacked against you. And that's why most people never make it back. The world doesn't want to fix this problem, it just wants to hide it. That's why cities install spikes on benches, remove public restrooms, pass laws making it illegal to sleep outside. They don't solve homelessness, they just make it harder to survive. Because the real goal isn't to help us. It's to make sure we disappear. And the worst part? Most people will never question it. Because as long as it's not happening to them, they don't want to know the truth. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you really looked at a homeless person? Not just a glance. Not just that quick, uncomfortable moment before you looked away. I mean, really saw them. Have you ever wondered what their name was? What their voice sounded like? Who they were before all of this? Or did you just keep walking? I get it. I really do. It's easier not to look. It's easier to pretend this isn't your problem, that it could never happen to you. Because if you admit that I exist, that people like me exist, then you have to admit how close you are to being here yourself. And that thought is too much for most people to handle. But here's what I want you to know. I wasn't always invisible. I was just like you. I had a home, a job, a routine. I laughed with friends, stood in line for coffee, worried about stupid things like whether my Wi-Fi was fast enough. And then, one day, I wasn't like you anymore. Do you really think it couldn't happen to you? You live paycheck to paycheck. You have debts. You have a job that sees you as replaceable, a landlord who wouldn't hesitate to evict you if you fell behind. One bad stroke of luck, an injury, an illness, a layoff, and you could be right here with me. And when that happens, no one will help you. They will look away. They will walk past. They will convince themselves that you must have done something wrong, because believing that is easier than facing the truth. that the system isn't designed to protect you. It's designed to keep moving without you. So what will you do? Will you forget this story the moment you close this page? Will you go back to your comfortable life and pretend people like me don't exist? Or will you stop? Will you look? Will you see us? Because if you don't, then nothing will ever change. And one day, it might be you who is invisible.